Or Hako, where has he gone to? Like, evaporated. Why did this happen?
Your Dr. Grinberg's disappearance was like that. The waters are very muddy. People have different versions of events. But as William Blake said, everything that you can believe is an image of truth.
Possibly, Hako could have been abducted into one of these secret projects. Against his will, or who knows?
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. We're a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and trying to raise our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Woody Brown, and this week, I'm all alone in the studio. That's right, folks. Tyler is just knee-deep in a deadline for a comic book cover that he's been working on for, well, a while now. And it's due in a few days, and he's just, the perfectionist that he is, he's just trying to basically make sure everything is squared away with it. So, because we missed last week due to my family's stomach virus illness, which was the worst, by the way, and hats off to all of you that have dealt with it this year, but it is just running rampant in our schools here. Anyhow, I decided I wanted to come in here this week and talk about something that I had written down on our list of things that I definitely wanted to cover this season. And it's one of those interesting stories that I've found that I kind of feel like I get the opportunity to sort of surprise Tyler with anyway, since over the years, he's always been the one to sort of, know this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, I really didn't. And so when I mentioned it to him, just the general idea for the topic, before we knew it would just be me in here, he kind of said, you know what, don't tell me any more about it. I don't really know if I know this story. And to be honest with you, that kind of shocked me. Again, because it rarely happens. So as fate would decide, now he gets to, just like you are doing right now, listen to me tell this amazing story. Before we dive into it, though, let me just say there are elements of this case that sort of immediately remind me of other things that we've talked about on our show, whether it be mysteriously disappearing people or astral projection or, secret governmental programs, and also the simulation theory, and of course, the quote-unquote matrix. So if you haven't listened to every one of our episodes, while I'm sort of making reference potentially to some of these topics, I'll be sure to include the episode number and title so that you can go back and brush up on some of those concepts so that I don't really kind of have to dive into it too deep in here. So let's get started. Today's story feels like it's been ripped straight from the pages of a sci-fi novel. This is a story of a man who sought to bridge the gap between science and mysticism. One who ventured deep into the realms of the unknown and then vanished without a trace. Today, we're going to be talking about the brilliant, sometimes controversial, and utterly fascinating Dr. Jacobo Grinberg. Now, full disclosure here, I'm not sure if it's Jacobo Grinberg. I'm just going to call him Jacobo Grinberg, and I hope that those of you listening, well, just give me a little grace here on my pronunciation. If you never heard of Dr. Jacobo Grinberg, well, honestly, just like I was, I think that you're in for a wild ride here. Initially, he was born in Mexico City in 1946. His parents were Polish Jewish immigrants who moved to Mexico. He ended up being a psychologist, neuroscientist, and researcher who dedicated his life to exploring the nature of human consciousness. But he wasn't content with just studying the brain in the way that traditional science dictated. As Tyler would probably say at this point, he was one of us. You see, Dr. Grinberg wanted to understand something far greater, the hidden forces that shape our perception of reality. And, well, that pursuit may have ultimately led to his disappearance. To understand how he got there, we kind of need to go back to his beginnings. Dr. Grinberg's fascination with the mind started at an early age. When he was just 12 years old, his mother tragically passed away from a brain tumor. That tragedy set him on a lifelong quest to understand the workings of the human brain. But, like I said before, his interest wasn't just in neuroscience. It extended into the mysterious, the esoteric, and even the supernatural. In 1963, Grinberg spent a year in Israel, an experience that deeply influenced his worldview. It was there that he became intrigued by spirits and mediums, meditation, shamanism, and even the mystical teachings of Kabbalah. But unlike many who get drawn into the spiritual, Grinberg didn't, quote-unquote, abandon science. He really wanted to merge the two. Now, after returning to Mexico after this trip, he pursued a degree in psychology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and later traveled to New York, where he earned his PhD in psychophysiology at the Brain Research Institute. There, his research was focused on how geometric stimuli affected the human brain. Sounds relatively traditional so far, right? But soon, Dr. Grinberg would take a turn down a much stranger or radder path. By the late 1970s, Grinberg had returned to Mexico and founded his own lab at Universidad Anahuac. Not sure if I said that right, but again, I appreciate your understanding. At first, his work still had its roots in psychology, but soon he began conducting experiments that, well, let's just say it more than likely made his peers raise a few eyebrows. One of his most controversial studies involved children, who he believed had the ability to communicate telepathically. He claimed that they could read words without actually seeing them, and even perceive ghosts and spirits. Unsurprisingly, parents were a little freaked out and pulled their kids from the program, as you can imagine. But that didn't stop Grinberg. If anything, it kind of pushed him even further. But then came the moment that kind of changed everything. His encounter with a character named Doña Pachita. Those of you that have kind of dove into this type of thing where we're talking about human consciousness and, you know, just the kind of the mystical and that kind of thing, may have heard of Pachita before. Pachita started out as a cabaret singer. She was a lottery ticket seller and a self-proclaimed mystic. She claimed to be the niece of Moctezuma and the sister of Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor. But that wasn't even the craziest part. She also claimed that she could materialize and dematerialize objects at will and perform surgeries without any medical instruments, only using her mind. Now, as you can imagine, most people dismissed her as a charlatan, like a showman or somebody that's just trying to trick people out of their money. Not Grinberg. He believed her. Not only that, but he developed an entire theory around people like Pachita, arguing that they could tap into what he called an informational matrix, a hidden field of energy and consciousness that normal humans couldn't perceive. He actually ended up documenting his entire time with Pachita in his book, Los Chamanes de Mexico, which was a 7-volume work that detailed everything he saw. However, folks have kind of described this series of work as disorganized, riddled with typos and full of low-quality images that barely capture sort of what's happening. Because within these books, there are supposed pictures of her performing some of these, surgeries. These accounts that he has in here are compelling. He claimed to have witnessed these psychic surgeries that Pachita would perform, materializing organs out of thin air and then inserting them into patients. Some of her more famous patients included jazz musician Charles Mingus and other celebrities who sought her help after Western medicine failed them. I think one of them also was Andy Kaufman. So maybe perhaps that's where you would have heard of Pachita before. But ultimately, Grinberg wasn't just theorizing. He was actually experimenting. He conducted telepathy studies claiming he had scientifically proven its existence. He called this phenomenon transferred potential, a neuronal field that connected all human minds. And this is what led him to his most famous idea, the synergy theory. Now, don't fiddle with the volume knob or anything. You didn't mishear me, and I didn't mispronounce it, actually, believe it or not. I didn't mispronounce synergy. The name of the theory is synergy, okay? And the synergy theory is one of the most fascinating and sort of mind-bending concepts in the world of consciousness studies. It attempts to bridge the gap between neuroscience, quantum physics, and of course mystical traditions by proposing that reality is not an independent external phenomenon, but rather a dynamic interaction between consciousness and an underlying informational field or matrix. Now, to truly understand this theory, I kind of want to break down its core components. First off, at its core, the synergy theory challenges the conventional scientific belief that reality exists independently of human perception. Grinberg believed that what we perceive as, quote, reality is not an objective fixed structure, but rather this product of consciousness interacting with a deeper fundamental field of information. This idea kind of aligns with many ancient spiritual traditions and even echoes certain principles from quantum mechanics, where the observer affects the observed phenomenon. Tyler and I both have talked about this, and sometimes it's what we kind of, I think at least myself, I can't really necessarily speak for Tyler on this one, but it is something that we utilize when we talk about people who have experienced some sort of interaction with a creature, a phenomenon of any kind, an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional creature, that perhaps their perceived reality is a product of their own experience, sort of just almost cemented to their own personal reality. if that makes sense. And I know we're kind of diving into some seriously deep, cerebral topics here today. And, you might have kind of showed up for the old 80s ninja movies, and here we are talking about consciousness. But this is one of those things, though, as we get a little bit deeper, you're going to see why I was so fascinated by this story. But I really do think it's very important for us to talk about, the Syntergy theory and Dr. Jacobo Grinberg's overall thought process. Because as you'll see, I really think maybe this is why he vanished off the face of the earth, one way or the other.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
You don't wake up dreaming of McDonald's fries. You wake up dreaming of McDonald's hash browns. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They're selling your passwords, bank details, and private messages. McAfee helps stop them. Secure VPN keeps your online activity private. AI-powered text scam detector spots phishing attempts instantly. And with award-winning antivirus, you get top-tier hacker protection. Plus, you'll get up to $2 million in identity theft coverage, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
More rewards, more savings. With American Express Business Gold, earn up to $395 back in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select shipping, food delivery, and retail subscription merchants, including the $155 Walmart Plus monthly membership credit and $240 flexible business credit. Enjoy the benefits of membership with the Amex Business Gold Card. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Hi, this is Javon, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep. I'm here to help with everything from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
No problem. I can even help schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Whatever you need.
So the first room we're looking at is for...
Shop Blinds.com now and save up to 45% site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The PC gave us computing power at home, the internet connected us, and mobile let us do it pretty much anywhere. Now generative AI lets us communicate with technology in our own language using our own senses. But figuring it all out when you're living through it is a totally different story. Welcome to Leading the Shift, a new podcast from Microsoft Azure. I'm your host, Susan Ettlinger. In each episode, leaders will share what they're learning to help you navigate all this change with confidence. Please join us. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you? Is anyone out there? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So Grinberg suggested that beneath our perceived reality, there exists a continuous energy field. It's what he calls the lattice. This lattice is an omnipresent, hyper-complex matrix containing all possible information about reality. Every object, every thought, and every experience is merely a specific configuration or distortion of this field. Some of you out there, Tyler, probably Clay, can probably guess where this is going. This concept mirrors physicist David Bohm's implicate order, which proposed that space itself is not empty, but filled with an interconnected web of information that gives rise to reality as we know it. But Grinberg's idea took this further by arguing that human consciousness directly interacts with and shapes this field. So, for example, think of the lattice like an infinite, invisible web of energy and information. I mean, I guess we don't have to really... I think this conversation, by the way, would be a lot more difficult if, we were around in the time that Dr. Grinberg was talking about this. It's a lot easier for us to imagine an invisible web of information and energy because our everyday lives are sort of inundated by that. I mean, if you think about it, we've got the internet, we've got Bluetooth technology. I mean, all of these things that kind of exist all around us already. I don't know, just something I was thinking about as we're talking about this. But our brains don't just receive external stimuli like cameras taking pictures. Instead, when we receive information, it decodes it, modifies it, and then projects the reality from this information field. And what we call the real world is actually a neural interpretation of this much deeper level of existence. Grinberg proposed that the human brain kind of acts like a biological filter. It interacts with this lattice and shapes it into the structured world that we end up experiencing. What we see, hear, and feel is not the external world itself, but rather our brain's interpretation of disturbances within the lattice. Now, already, this is one of those things that's going to make my head spin out of control, I feel like, because as I'm talking to you, my face is in front of a microphone. I can feel the desk underneath my hands here in the studio. And when I say that out loud, it's like all of this is my brain's interpretation of disturbances within the lattice. It's super easy for me to kind of dismiss this, or I should say it would be super easy for me to dismiss things like this, mainly just because of my own inexperience in attempting to really understand concepts like this at such a granular level. I think that it's so deeply ingrained in our biology that we kind of take our everyday experiences for granted. But mystics, shamans, and altered states of consciousness like deep meditation, psychedelics, or sometimes near-death experiences reportedly have allowed individuals to bypass the brain's usual filtering process and perceive reality more directly. If you're familiar with any of that stuff, whether it is deep meditation, I think here within the last, 10 or 15 years, it's become really popular to talk about psychedelic use and even in the microdosing sense. And of course, everyone's kind of always been fascinated, I think, myself included, with reading about or watching interviews with people who have had near-death experiences. Grinberg believed that advanced shamans, like the ones that he studied and documented, were able to directly manipulate the lattice. This would, of course, explain the paranormal phenomena he documented, such as telepathy, psychic healing, and materialization of objects. it also kind of goes hand in hand with things that we talk about on our show when we talk about the fascination we have with, well, and it really just specifically when we talk about the simulation theory and just the matrix and all that, when we talk about these almost like this rule set that somehow even someone in religious texts such as Jesus still had to sort of, even though he was performing miracles, still had to follow this rule set. You know, Tyler always brings up the blind man and the mud being rubbed on his eyes and stuff. It's like that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit with this ability to sort of influence and or change what he calls the lattice. So let's dive into this word synergy. It's a term that is a fusion of synthesis and energy, referring to the way that the brain synchronizes and interacts with the lattice. According to Grinberg, reality is not a pre-existing structure, but an ongoing process. The brain synchronizes with the lattice at various degrees of intensity, and the greater the synchronization, the more control an individual has over their perception of reality. And people who have achieved a heightened synchronization, such as shamans, monks, or individuals in deep meditation, can access these different, quote, versions of reality, potentially altering physical laws as we understand them. I think the best way to kind of, imagine this is imagine reality as a radio broadcast, okay? Howdy folks, and welcome back to another episode of Most people's brains are tuned in to a specific frequency, which would be our everyday sort of shared reality. But some individuals, through deep training or mystical experiences, can adjust the dial, accessing other layers of existence. This is within the same underlying energy field. This could sort of help to explain things like ESP, out-of-body experiences, telepathy, and even remote viewing. The implications of Dr. Grinberg's synergy theory, if he was correct, would mean that reality is not fixed but fluid, and that we are active participants in shaping the world around us, not just passive observers. The material world emerges from consciousness, not the other way around. Telepathy, remote viewing, and even shamanic healing might be explainable as advanced manipulation of this lattice. And rather than being opposed to science and spirituality mixing, his position was that they're deeply connected. Two sides of the same truth. His ideas obviously also align with the simulation theory, which is super interesting. In fact, in a lot of ways can begin to explain a lot of different things if you really, really think about it that we mentioned on the show. And without getting too deep into things like quantum mechanics, I do want to point out a couple things about how his ideas really sort of parallel modern developments in quantum physics. There's quantum entanglement, which two particles remain connected across vast distances, influencing each other simultaneously. This resembles Grinberg's telepathy experiments, where two people's brainwaves synchronized despite being in separate rooms. And we're going to talk about those experiments in just a second. Also, the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, a particle's behavior changes depending on whether it's being observed. This supports the idea that perception influences reality, just as Grinberg suggested. Okay, let's talk about Grinberg's experiments because they're really fascinating and pretty, these experiments supporting this synergy theory. So he conducted several different types. First, let's talk about the telepathy studies. In one of his experiments, he had two people that meditated together to establish a connection. They were then placed in separate rooms with EEG machines that would monitor their brain activity. One subject in one room was exposed to flashing lights, while the other subject in a separate room remained in absolute silence. And listen to this. This is just crazy. Here was the result. The second subject's brain showed activity at the exact same time as the first, the person with the flashing lights in the other room, suggesting a non-local connection between their minds. When he was working closely with Doña Pichita, the shaman known for performing psychic surgeries, again, he claimed to witness her materializing organs out of thin air, as if she were able to manipulate the lattice itself. He believed that she had reached a level of synchronization with the field that allowed her to alter reality directly. He also did several experiments with perception and reality, where he explored whether individuals could perceive objects without actually seeing them, supporting the idea that our brain sort of constructs this reality rather than simply receiving it. When I read this, immediately what came to mind was, Dr. Peter Venkman's experiments in Ghostbusters. That's kind of what I was picturing for his perception and reality tests. And by the way, for all of you science nerds out there, going back to the telepathy experiments with the one subject in the room with the flashing lights and the other subject in a dark room with no sound and everything, completely isolated. He was able to repeat this experiment multiple times, and I think his success rate, meaning I think 25% of the cases, the responses matched almost perfectly, which is pretty crazy. So knowing that, if his findings were accurate and there wasn't any data manipulation or anything, it suggests that human minds can be connected on a fundamental level beyond space and time. And if that's true, then our entire perception of reality might be an illusion. What's interesting is, for me personally, it's not too crazy for me to think two minds can be connected. I mean, there's many, whether it's in a creative capacity, like Tyler and myself when we were, writing songs together, or now with this podcast, but even, with myself and my wife, or, my family, my parents, my children. I mean, it's not hard for me to believe. Well, I'll just come out and say, I feel like my mind is connected to those folks. I don't know. Do you ever get that feeling sometimes when something's not right with, a sibling or one of your children or your spouse who, hey, why is she ignoring me? What did I do? Usually that's a little bit more obvious. Anyhow, let's take a quick break. But when we get back, this is really where the story starts to heat up. I know I kind of dove a little deep, probably a little too deep. In fact, if it was Tyler wanting to dive deeper into this Entergy theory, I probably would have dialed him back a little bit and said, well, let's just get to the meat and the potatoes. But when we get back from this break, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, because we're going to talk about how Dr. Grinberg performed all this research. He did all these studies, wrote tons of books, was interviewed countless times, and then in December 1994, just when he was about to turn 48 years old, in fact, a week before his birthday, he disappeared.
We'll return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for corpse. And they moved in.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. Okay, so it's December 1994. Like I said, Grinberg is about to turn 48. And just a week shy of his birthday, he called his daughter, and he said he was heading to Nepal for some meditation. But when his birthday party came and went, there's no Grinberg. Investigators found no plane tickets in his name, no travel records, nothing to suggest he had actually left Mexico. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Some believe he was silenced by the government. Possibly even the CIA. Interestingly enough, some declassified CIA documents show that Grinberg's name appears in files related to Project Stargate. Now, you've probably heard Tyler and I talk about some of these secret government projects before. MK Ultra, Operation Paperclip, maybe even the Montauk Project. But I don't think we've dedicated an entire episode to those things. We've kind of just mentioned them in passing when we talk about things like this. But one of the strangest, most controversial programs, if they're not all controversial, was Project Stargate. And this was a classified U.S. Army initiative focused on psychic phenomena, remote viewing, and, believe it or not, attempts to weaponize the human mind. A lot of this you can kind of see aspects of that were kind of influenced by the Montauk Project as well in shows like Stranger Things. Project Stargate began in the 1970s during the Cold War, when intelligence agencies became obsessed with the idea that the Soviets might be using psychics for espionage.
If you attack us, we will attack you. If you attack us, we will attack you.
The U.S. wasn't about to fall behind, so they assembled a team of scientists, researchers, and yes, actual psychics to see if extrasensory perception, or ESP, could be used for national security. The goal? To train individuals to see across vast distances using only their minds to gather intel on enemy bases, nuclear sites, and even track down missing people. One of the most famous subjects was a guy named Ingo Swann. He was a self-proclaimed psychic who stunned researchers when he allegedly remote viewed Jupiter, describing details about the planet's rings before they were even confirmed by NASA's Pioneer 10 probe.
Ingo Swann claims to have used this astral body to travel to distant planets. He tells us how it feels to travel in this energy body.
I mean, there's a lot of things I can't explain. Let's establish that. I just don't know how to explain them. But here I am on Earth, remote viewing the moon. And on the moon, I encounter some guys doing something, I don't know what they were doing. And they were looking at the place that I thought I was looking at them from. I mean, what of me was on the moon that they could look at it where I was? This doesn't quite make sense. But they weren't looking at me back on Earth. They were looking like at the place where I thought I was looking at them on.
And then there was Pat Price, a former police officer who supposedly used remote viewing to locate classified Soviet installations with uncanny accuracy. But here's the kicker. After decades of research, millions of dollars in funding, and hundreds of experiments, the government ultimately shut it down in the mid-90s, claiming the results were inconclusive and had limited operational value. But even still, plenty of people believe that programs like this never really end. They just go deeper underground. You know, I'm about halfway through the Montauk Project book. It's taken me forever to get through it, for no other reason than I'm just reading a bunch of other stuff. But it's interesting because that's true about the Montauk Project. I mean, most of these projects either get renamed, relabeled, get funding from a new organization, and they keep on going. That's sort of what happened there. It's kind of, the Montauk Project is sort of a continuation of, oh gosh, Tyler would kill me for not knowing this just off the top of my head. Oh, like the Philadelphia Experiment. I mean, all these Philadelphia Experiment, Project Rainbow, a bunch of these projects and government-funded programs sometimes, you know, get shut down, and they're privately funded, and then again, the government gets interest in them again, and it's just like this cycle. So because of that, of course, people still believe, well, you know, I bet Project Stargate in some capacity is still active. Now, Project Stargate itself is one of those topics that truly deserves its own deep dive episode, and trust me, we will be covering it someday soon. And I know we say that often, and I appreciate you kind of sticking around, but stay tuned for that because I really want to dive into it more, and I want to do the Montauk Project and all of these things. But something that kind of, I don't know, when I was doing the research for this episode, slapped me right in the face was Project Stargate was shut down. When? The mid-90s. When did Grinberg disappear? December 1994. Almost exactly the definition of the mid-90s. And what's crazy is he wasn't just the only one in his family to disappear. Reportedly, his wife was kind of a fugitive, and she disappeared exactly 1 year later. So, was she involved? Did they escape together? Or was she silenced too because she knew too much? Most of the theories surrounding his disappearance have something to do with government, whether it's U.S. or Mexican authorities, or, you know, even like, three-letter agencies such as the CIA had something to do with his disappearance. It's even stranger that there's no sort of paper trail, there's no tickets to go to Nepal. There was no evidence of any kind left behind. You know, no body, no blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. And in case you're wondering, it's still unsolved. Some people had the theory that, well, maybe his wife was involved somehow with his disappearance. But a lot of folks in his family, I think his brother referred to her mental state as wanting to control him and be controlling of him. The fact that she disappears exactly a year later, though, kind of brings people back to the idea that maybe he was taken, and then subsequently she was taken. An interesting piece to all this is that she didn't report him missing right away. In fact, it was Grinberg's colleagues at his lab that were the first to raise the alarms about his absence, not his wife. She initially even told people that he was on a trip, but that was never verified. So variations of that theory is that she harmed him out of jealousy, control, or fear. Maybe she was working with an unknown third party like the government, a cult, or other forces, or that she was forced into hiding after Grinberg's disappearance. There are other theories that talk about the potential of him maybe being captured by a cult or occult group. Because of his deep interest in shamanism and spiritualism and psychic phenomena, he interacted with various mystical groups all the time. So some people believe that maybe one of these groups might have had some kind of hand in his disappearance. You know, he's kind of exploring this quote-unquote forbidden knowledge, and occult groups were watching out for him. People have even said that maybe because of his knowledge, he was sacrificed in a ritual, or maybe he even joined a secretive cult and erased his identity, and that's where he ended up. Some people have even said, hey, look, maybe he had a mental breakdown and ended up running away. Many of those close to him actually reported signs of paranoia before his disappearance. In fact, the months leading up to his vanishing, folks said that he was acting strangely and seemed fearful for his life. Because his studies blended neuroscience, metaphysics, and mysticism and stuff, he was known to use some hallucinogens in his research. Some speculate that maybe the use of such things kind of, I don't know, maybe he had like a psychotic break. But still, there's no confirmed death, there's no murder evidence, there's no body, no definitive proof of foul play that has ever been found. I mean, in some ways I kind of think, well, is it possible? Could he have just, I don't know, wandered out into the mountains, determined to just live life in a remote location, maybe even fake his own disappearance and escape academic pressure or government pressure and scrutiny? Was he suffering from extreme paranoia and convinced himself that he needed to hide? Or did he do it? Did he actually unlock this ultimate secret of consciousness? I mean, again, remember his theories, and that's why I went so deep into the synergy theory, was that reality is not fixed but shaped by consciousness. Did he discover the way to manipulate it? Did he disappear into another realm and is just kind of either trapped there or figured out, hey, I kind of like it here better? Did he come back for his wife and take her along with him? It's interesting to me because, you know, as I mentioned before, he had children. I don't know why he wouldn't take them. So again, that aspect kind of points to the foul play in my book. Overall, though, I don't know. I mean, as I was reading about this guy and looking for sources and resources and all that, I will say that a lot of there's this documentary that came out, I think, in 2020, and it's all in Spanish. I think there was an English translation that was available for some time, but it's completely just, as far as I could find, just wiped off the internet. Now, Tyler, of course, is thinking as he's listening to this, it's the dead internet theory, right? Where things that once were on the internet are just completely vanished. And this is the first time that I've actually personally run into something like this, where there's a movie that exists. I mean, I looked to see if I could maybe buy it on Apple, and then, you know, hopefully it would have English subtitles, something. Nope, gone, poof. But also just in general, Dr. Jacobo Grinberg and his sort of fringe genius energy kind of reminded me of some of the other figures that Tyler and I have talked about over the years. Just sometimes in passing, and mostly I would say in passing as we talk about these things. One of them is John Dee. That's the 16th century alchemist, mathematician, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth, who believed he could communicate with angels and unlock the secrets of the universe. Like Grinberg, he tried to merge science with the mystical. Then, of course, there's the ever-famous Nikola Tesla, who, not so much in the mystical sense, but he had the same sort of boundary-pushing approach to science. His ideas were so ahead of their time that even today, conspiracy theories swirl around what he may have really discovered. And, of course, my favorite, is he a time traveler? Then there is Philip K. Dick. Not a scientist, but Philip K. Dick's obsession with simulated realities and government conspiracy, altered consciousness, and the amazing books that he's written kind of make him fall right in line with this Grinberg. And then, of course, the two government experiments that I talked about are projects, the Montauk Project and MK Ultra, where they kind of tap into the same sort of themes of mind over matter and psychic abilities and controlling or manipulating or altering one's consciousness. Look, I don't know what happened to him, but Grinberg's story is one of the strangest and raddest stories that I have encountered. Was he a genius ahead of his time, or did he spiral into delusion? Did he uncover the secrets of reality, or did he simply vanish into it? I don't know what to think. And like you, I wish Tyler was here as well, but he needed some time and I gave it to him. So I agreed that I would come in here and tell you guys this story. But here's what I want. It's my one ask, okay? Is I want to hear what your thoughts are about this guy. Do you think he uncovered some sort of secret to reality, the ability to manipulate this thing he called the lattice, so that maybe he opened up what we call like a portal into this other area? Maybe he never really disappeared at all, but just sort of lives within that lattice. I don't know. It's kind of wild. I want to hear what your thoughts are about it. Of course, I guess that means that you have to sort of give me your opinion on whether or not anything like that would be possible. But if he just disappeared, what do you think? Did he maybe uncover something with Project Stargate that he shouldn't have? Maybe he obtained some knowledge or had access to information that later became so classified that the result was his disappearance and then later his wife's disappearance? Or did he just, I don't know, join some cult and live in the mountains of Mexico somewhere, enjoying the last days of his life? Whatever your theory is, I want to hear it. The best way to do that is over on our Instagram page. If you have had your own experience with manipulating the lattice or astral projection or any other mind-bending altered reality states, let us know. You can let us know in the comments, or you can direct message us over on Instagram, or you can email us at thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com to tell us your story. Now, oftentimes we will present listener stories, whether that's us reading them and adding the sound design and effects so it can be a more immersive experience. Or sometimes, if you're brave enough, you can actually send us recordings of your voice. You can do that via email, or you can go over to our website, thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can actually send us a voice recording straight from the website. And then, speaking of our website, when you go there, you can have access to our merchandise store, sign up for our mailing list, search through the archive of every single episode we've ever released. And no matter what, we always enjoy hearing from you. If you're a new listener to the show, please take the time out to, write a 5-star review. If it's less than that, okay, but a 5-star would be awesome. And tell us what it is that you like about our show. Doing that not only makes us feel like we're doing good, but beyond the selfish sort of reasoning, it also, for whatever reason, gets our name out in front of other and more people, more listeners, creating this larger community of people to sort of interact with each other and talk about this crazy but rad world that we live in. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, hopefully next week we'll be back, the both of us in the studio at the same time. I can't wait to hear what you think about Dr. Jacobo Grinberg and where his whereabouts or what happened to him. And until next week, I love you. I appreciate you. And as always, be rad.
That's the way it goes. You're my time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of